Welcome to the webinar. Today we're very excited to be launching new guidance around working with EAL learners in early years settings. If you haven't already seen the guidance, we've shared the link in the chat and we'll share it again later on. Our speaker today is Karen Warwick, who's one of the trainers here at the Bell Foundation. Karen joined the Bell Foundation in November 2020, having previously worked as an EAL specialist teacher for local authorities and independently. Before that, Karen was a primary teacher. Karen has an MA in education and a CELTA qualification. Her work with the foundation includes delivering online training and significant involvement in the scaling of the Bell Foundation's EAL programme regionally. I'll hand over to Karen now. Thanks, Karen.
Well, hello, everyone. As Caroline said, thank you for that introduction. I'm Karen Warwick, and you're very welcome this afternoon to the launch of our updated guidance for working with EAL learners in early years settings. So without further ado, in this session, I aim to answer 5 basic questions and illustrating my answers with examples from the document itself. And I'll finish with a brief illustrative case study to show how a fictional early years practitioner might use a document to include and assess a young EAL learner in their class. As Caroline said, there will be opportunities to ask questions at the end, but use a quick Q&A function. So let's get started and first look at why it was decided we needed to update the early year guidance. So as an overall aim of the updated guidance is to help you, early years practitioners, make provision not only socially inclusive, but linguistically inclusive to address the unique environments, developmental characteristics and needs of young multilingual learners in the early years settings. I thought I'd start with this quote from Jean Conte, which highlights what to me is a main message throughout this webinar and in the new guidance. And I'll give you a moment to look at that quote. Jean Conte has an excellent book in its 4th edition now, the Teaching EAL book, and it has a really practical and grounding chapter on EAL in the early years, chapter 4, which you may find useful to read if ever you have the time. But it's very good, very grounding. Okay, so moving on. A very practical reason is that the old early years guiding principles needed to be updated to bring it in line with and to reflect the new version of the classroom support strategies that we launched last year in 2023, and to ensure that there is consistency in the guidance we are providing, including updating appropriate resource links, etc. It was also recognised that there was a need to update the old early years guidance to respond to an increasing and changing population in nursery in particular. So the last census headcount in January 2024 tells us that state nurseries are at presently 30.7%, which is up from 30.4% in 22-23 of young learners who use English as a second language. So of course, this will have considerable impact on the early years foundation stage cohorts on the coming academic years. And of course, this is due to many reasons, including new populations of refugees and asylum seekers. There's also a need to provide guidance on the 5 key principles of effective EAL pedagogy in early years settings. And this is something I'll pick up on a little bit later. There's also a need recognised to include a section for guidance for leaders, which is to emphasise the urgent need for training of their early years staff. And in addition, there have been, over time, frequent requests to produce guidance that works alongside the assessment framework to support early years practitioners assess proficiency in English and the understanding, underpinning why that's important. So with all this in mind, it was time to now look at the early years guidance and update it accordingly. So what have we produced? We've produced, obviously, a new guidance, updated, which is downloadable and printable, and of course is got all the links and relevant resources to web pages and research, etc., updated within it. It also reflects the new version of the support strategies, with a major difference is that the Bell Foundation's key principles for EAL teaching are used to frame and organise the guidance and strategies. And again, this will be picked up on a little bit later in the presentation. There is also guidance on how the document can work alongside the Bell Foundation's framework to assess proficiency in English for young learners. And as part of our research, we also ran focus group and consulted BFLPs and ILPs from who with an interest in early years in the primary sector, and for their opinion and comment on what would be useful, not useful in the new guidance. So if there's anyone watching here today who contributed to those to that focus group, a big thank you to you, and again, thank you for your comments and your opinions, which were very invaluable. So who will use it? Well, this guidance is primarily intended for anyone involved and tasked with overseeing and creating inclusive environments to support and enable young multilingual learners in early years setting. So we envisage senior leaders, any leaders responsible for overseeing early years provision, early year coordinators, early years staff, SENCOs, teaching assistants, and nursery nurses. So there's a lot of staff involved, as always in early year settings. So we hope that this document will reach everybody. So we have dive a little deeper now into how the document is organised for you. As before, there is one document, and as you can see in the screenshot of the contents here, there are 4 sections in the document. I'll just quickly signpost you to those, and at the end there's also a section, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but those are suggestion descriptors from the reading and viewing and writing descriptors in the assessment framework for bands A, B, and of course there are references. I would add though, please don't be afraid to step out and use this document if you are in a nursery setting or in Key Stage 1, like for example in Year 1, and I would even say sometimes in Year 2, there'll be something to touch across that slightly beyond the foundation stage. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the first section, the introduction. So we'll now have a little look at the 5 principles in the second section that we've already mentioned. So the first thing that you will notice in the updated early years guidance, that it is not organised according to the assessment bands A to E for proficiency in English from the Bell Foundation EAL assessment framework, but it is organised to align with the Bell Foundation's key principles. And as I alluded to earlier, this is to ensure that the Bell Foundation's overall offer to schools is coherent and our core values are consistent. So also, the 5 principles have also been updated to reflect what is unique to this group of multilingual learners, while guiding schools to develop and embed effective EAL provision. And for convenience, the 5 principles are colour-coded, so the strategies match the principles. There are full versions of each principle within the document, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of them and the importance they have for early year settings. So, our first principle, multilingualism is an asset. So we are reminded within this principle of the importance of a young learner's multilingualism and their ability to speak, listen, to read and view and write in more than potentially one language, and that they are still, and this is the important point, they are still developing their language alongside English. So it highlights the significant advantages in the need to maintain home language, and of course reminded what a valuable resource their home language is. There is plenty of research around the crucial role that a learner's home language plays in their sense of identity and well-being and academic achievement at the start of their educational journey and onwards. And strategies and suggestions to help you approach and embed principle 1 can be found in the strategy section of this guidance. Of course, I'll look at that a little bit later. So, principle 2, high expectations with appropriate language support. So principle 2 really expands on this and reminds us of the double task young multilingual learners have ahead of them from their start, at the start of their journey in the early years setting. They're simultaneously learning the English language and learning through English. And the benefits of high expectations to inspire them and motivate them, challenge them, build their confidence, move towards independence, can be found and read about in the strategies, again, in the strategy section of the guidance. And we have principle 3, which is quite a big one, integrated focus on content and language. And this principle reminds us that young multilingual learners may be fully capable of cognitively understanding developmental activities and experiences in their home languages, even if they may be unable to access or fully express this understanding in English. This is, of course, an important point for in the assessment process, which we'll pick up on a little bit later, and highlights the importance of integrating English language development and embedding this into the learning experiences within the language-rich early years settings. And again, strategies and suggestions that can integrate this language and learning experience can be found in the strategies section, and very much keeps in mind this double job that young multilingual learners are faced with. So we have principle 4, which is effective and holistic assessment. And encapsulated in this principle is the overarching statement for the principle. EAL assessment builds a broad picture of the early year learner, which enables teachers to plan appropriate and targeted support. This principle also builds on the previous 3 principles already explained. So in principle 4, we are reminded of the importance of effective, continuous and formative assessment, the importance of gathering information about a young learner's preschool experiences and current developmental skills to aid and inform the formative assessment process. The principle promotes the importance of observation in observing play and learning and the developmental skills that a young multilingual learner brings to the setting when they start school. And it helps to build that initial and holistic and accurate picture of the child's present experience for you to build on. So embedded in the explanation of this principle is a link to section 0.41, that will take you to more information about assessment of proficiency in English. And again, you can read more about more ways you can promote Principle 4 in the strategy section of the guidance. And finally, we have Principle 5, social inclusion, which in many ways underpins all the other principles and really goes so much deeper than putting multilingual welcome signs around the school or multilingual classroom signage, though I'm going to say, of course, this is really, really important, and I'm not dismissing this, but it just goes a lot deeper because it reminds us of the advantages of successful whole school social inclusion approaches, which help and support young multilingual learners and their families feel safe, feel secure, and feel included in school life from day one, which of course not only benefits the school, but will improve outcomes and the well-being for all concerned. And of course, this will be particularly important for young multilingual learners seeking asylum with their families. And again, there'll be strategies to contribute to facilitating social inclusion, which can be in the strategy section of this guidance. So then we move on to section 3 of the guidance, which, as I mentioned, is an important addition, the guidance for leaders. So the reason for including this section is because an increasing number of children are growing up in environments in which more than one language is spoken. I've already mentioned that currently 30.7% of children entering nursery school in England are recorded as having a first language known or believed to be other than English. And for some children, the early years setting may be their first contact with the English language, while other children may have been exposed or developed English alongside one or more additional languages. And certainly at home, they may be hearing English spoken by their older siblings. So this linguistic diversity makes the role of the early years leaders even more crucial to promote inclusion here. So in this section of the guidance, it's divided into 3 subheadings for you, or for leaders, to guide them in this approach. So firstly, we have multilingual language development in the early years. So in this section, the leaders are directed to the importance of reasons, research on supporting and developing a child's home language, and of course the advantages of being multilingual, which is very much integrated with their social, cultural and linguistic, how they identify and what they identify with, and it's of course very much part of their well-being. So the guidance then directs leaders to the importance of providing training opportunities for early years staff, which researchers indicates in this sector is lacking. It's important to note that the early years foundation stage strategy framework, sections 1.14 and 1.15 in that document, does support the provision of children using home language alongside play and learning. So therefore, guidance and suggestions are included in this section to address this urgent training need for early years staff to be taken seriously. And finally, the final section for leaders is a section around building relationships with families and communities. So this section provides sound, well-rehearsed advice on the importance of engaging with multilingual families to build trust, create inclusive school communities. There is an excellent list of tips to support leaders to look at or review their family engagement and approaches. Okay, so that's the guidance for leaders section. And then our final section, section 4, is divided into two sections. The first section, section 4.1, is assessment of proficiency in English, and section 4.2 is then the early years support strategy. So this is very much the set guidance for practitioners now. Okay, so the first section, assessing English language proficiency. So firstly, that offers insight and suggestions on why it is important to assess the English language proficiency for young learners. This is because research consistently shows that clear link between proficiency in English and educational attainment. And this starts with our young learners in early year setting. It talks about the growing diversity of this group of learners and the understanding of where they are on their English language journey. It reminds us that one size does not fit all. Proficiency in English is a significant part of this journey. Some young learners will come quite proficient in English, whereas, as we've already said, some young learners may not. And it's really important to identify that so that the right support is put in place and targeted where appropriate. It also provides guidance on why using an evidence-informed assessment framework, such as the Bell Foundation's assessment framework, alongside the communication and language early learning goals that you are all familiar with and use in your settings. So it can help early years practitioners in this process to understand the ongoing English language development skills that need to be targeted and supported in the assessment process. Okay, so within the guidance, you are also briefly reminded about how the Bell Foundation assessment framework is organised. And you may recall, if you've seen it before, it's got 4 language domains: listening, speaking, reading and viewing, and writing, and that each language domain has got 5 proficiency bands from A to E. And you are reminded that within each proficiency band, there are overarching definitions for that band. You're also reminded that each proficiency band has 10 descriptors, which are sequenced to reflect likely progression within each band, where descriptors 1 to 3 represent early development of that band, and descriptors 8 to 10 is where you're getting closer to proficiency in that band, and then moving on to the next proficiency band. So learners may not achieve all these descriptors within a band in the same order or at the same time, and they may show evidence of achieving descriptors in the next band. So never assume that a young multilingual learner is only in band A. In section 4.1, we also offer further guidance on how to use the Bell Foundation assessment framework in the early years, alongside the communication and language early learning goals, to establish that best fit judgment of English language proficiency. So the guidance recognises that early years language development is typically driven through listening and speaking. So it is suggested that you may want to begin with these sections of the assessment framework first. The guidance also recognises that given the diversity within the term English as an additional language, young learners may also begin to develop English language proficiency skills in reading, viewing, and/or writing, and hence the reason for putting Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 at the end, so that you've got some guidance on where to go for relevant descriptors for these language domains. So moving on briefly to the organisation of the strategies themselves, which is in section 4.2. You may recall that the old early years guiding principles were organised around 5 different subheadings, but in this updated version, as I've already mentioned, you may recall that all the strategies are now strategies and suggestions are now organised around the 5 principles, and also they are not organised around the proficiency band. And we've done this to recognise the important fact that all children in the early years foundation phase are still developing their language, which we mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation. So the strategies from the previous guidance under the previous subheadings have all been reorganised in this updated guidance to provide you with some practical ways of implementing each of the 5 principles within the early years setting. And many of you will be familiar with them, and they contribute to all good practice for all children, and some may be specific to learners using EAL. In addition, you will also notice that your 4 early years foundation stage core guiding principles that you are all familiar with, they are still included, and they have been retained, and they are referenced to show how they correlate and overlap with this new guidance within each principle. And what you will notice is that the principle "a unique child" will overlap practically in every principle. So they're still there. We've just shown how they fit into each of our 5 principles. So you will notice that the strategies are also divided into subheadings, different subheadings within each strategy, within the strategies for each principle. So for example, for principle 3, we've got a number of subheadings there, which help sort of classify the different strategies for you. For example, we've got strategies using stories and songs, strategies for pre-teaching, developing understanding through context using visuals, and strategies for developing vocabulary. So that's you'll find that consistent throughout the principles. Okay, and obviously under each subheading, there are a range of inclusive suggestions and activities you can use to guide your practice. For example, this one is on using stories with repetitive refrain, followed by suggestions on using ready-made story props, etc., and visuals, and so on. Okay, so when and where will this be useful? As mentioned earlier, this document will be useful for practitioners and senior leaders. So it'd be useful for anyone in the foundation phase to use alongside the Bell Foundation assessment framework, and provide suggestions for initial and formative assessments for informing of activities, approaches, and how you can elicit proficiency in English for the youngest members of our schools. It'll be useful particularly for leaders with budgets to think about when considering classroom organisation, deployment of staff, especially staff numbers, and the potential positive impact of employing multilingual staff. We hope it will be useful for practitioners and senior leaders in providing that EAL-friendly lens to help you when you're considering creating or indeed buying in learning and play resources that are appropriately culturally inclusive for the diverse early year settings these days, and be useful for practitioners in offering suggestions on teaching, learning, play ideas and activities. And ultimately, it's useful for everyone, because at some point, most teachers will teach in a multilingual classroom at some point in their career. And this is particularly the case because as currently there is no expectation To cover EAL provision in ITT, new teachers are starting their careers feeling unprepared, as well as experienced teachers finding themselves significantly changing cohorts. So we are a very multilingual nation now. So I'm now going to aim to show what this might look like in practice. And I'm very pleased because time is doing well, so we should have time for questions at the end. So I would like you to meet Saadia. So Saadia is an Urdu speaker who arrived from Pakistan in the second term of reception. Saadia has not attended school before, and this is due to her age. This would be an age-appropriate thing for her. But her mum describes her as very excited to start and to make friends. Her parents also provide information on her age-appropriate language development to the teacher, and they describe her Urdu as very good. They tell the teacher that Saadia can recite her numbers to 10 and count objects in a line to 4 in Urdu. She knows lots of everyday vocabulary. She loves looking at books and enjoys hearing stories read to her in Urdu. Mum reads and sings with her at home. So she loves playing with her toy animals, and she's chatty and busy at home. So when she comes to school and she is shy and quiet, but she is full of curiosity, and she's in luck because this term is kicking off with a topic on pets, using the storybook Dear Zoo as an initial stimulus. So what does the teacher do? Well, the teacher has a look at the section for early years strategies in the new guidance to see how they can plan to ensure that Saadia settles, feels included in her learning straight away from each principal based on what they have been told. And more importantly as well, to activate her prior knowledge and experience as much as possible. So looking first at principle 1, multilingualism is an asset, the teacher finds the following suggestions and is really reassured that the suggestions require little preparation, and indeed some of aspects of the provision are already in place, and they will help Saadia feel settled and linguistically included. So, such as learning some basic greetings in Urdu. They already do this most days during register with lots of other languages in the setting. There's also multilingual signage, and labelling is highlighted as important, and the teacher knows that she can add Urdu to what is around the classroom already. There are further suggestions around first language pairs. There is another little learner who speaks Urdu in the class, and this learner has been in school since nursery, so the teacher plans to ensure that Saadia is introduced and included in paired and group work with this other learner. The teacher sensitively explains to this other learner about this beforehand. There is also guidance on using translation tools. So a mobile device is provided to adults assigned to supporting Saadia during play and specific learning activities. And what the teacher notices is lots of exchange between the adult and Saadia, learning names of animals in each other's languages or names of objects around the classroom, and teaching each other their language as they go about their daily tasks. And what the teacher also notices is that a lot of these suggestions are providing her or him with valuable assessment information about Saadia's age-appropriate home language proficiency, knowledge and development, that in a very non-threatening way that can be built on. Continuing with multilingualism is an asset, the teacher decides to involve Sadia's parents in her learning from the outset. So the teacher recalls the parents asking if they should continue to use their home language at home with Sadia now that she is in school. And the teacher, of course, reassures them that yes, they should, and notices the first statement of the importance of this in the document. And to emphasize this further as important, the teacher decides to send home keywords and phrases for the topic words and everyday school words for mum or dad or both to sit with Sadia to translate them so that she understands. She also decides to send home a Diazoo visual word mat to the parents so that the animal names of the story can be translated, and therefore Sadia is sitting listening to her story with much more knowledge of the vocabulary that she's hearing. So the teacher can see that Sadia's parents are very keen and they are very grateful that they are being informed about what topics are being covered so that they can help their daughter. So moving on to principle 2, the teacher looks at this guidance and finds many suggestions of good practice, particularly the use of visuals, and all of them can be applied in this case. But the teacher decides to particularly focus on opportunities to communicate and respond to questions, and reads around this, how this is important. Even if a young learner isn't ready to respond, because they will be actively listening and absorbing new language. They may be going through a non-verbal period, and this is normal. They may not. They may be very happy to respond. So involving them in reciprocal dialogue should really be encouraged from the outset, because you may get a nod, you may get a smile, you may get an acknowledgement of understanding somehow. And of course, this will inform your initial assessment. Sitting Sadia, positioning her on the carpet with near to another adult so that it'll enable her to listen and pick up on cues. Using visuals, I've already mentioned, and observing and noticing what Sadia is saying when she's playing alongside her peers. So the teacher decides to ensure that an adult is directed to facilitate this, record it in appropriate assessment profile documents as part of an ongoing initial assessment profiling. So again, these strategies actually require very little preparation, but they are very inclusive and they are effective. In addition, the teacher is planning to include more collaborative turn-taking games around the topic pets, and notes in the suggestion that it is a really good idea for Sadia to be part of this, and the advice is to position learners using EAL who are new to English towards the end of the turn-taking game so they become familiar with the vocabulary, language structures required for the game as part of their learning with their peers. So that's another suggestion that the teacher has to use. Okay, so continuing again with integrated focus and content of language, the teacher notices that the use of repetitive stories, in this case Diazoo, is a perfect book for the suggestions of using repetitive stories and using enhanced with using story props with visual flashcards that you can sequence while you're telling a story, and encapsulating this even further by using animal gestures, noises that the class, including Sadia, can all join in with. So you have that inclusive storytelling time. And the teacher also notices the suggestions to develop vocabulary and develop this understanding through content. So she decides to ask a TA to teach and model vocab in a short pre-teaching session, sort of daily if possible, using the flashcards and visuals from the Dear Zoo story and including her peers. So she realises many children will benefit from this session too. So the teacher shares the suggestion guidance with the TA so that other suggestions can also be extended, can be used to extend language. And the teacher notes the importance of using the new vocabulary frequently and plans to, oh, I've lost my place, I'm terribly sorry. And plans to play matching games such as bingo and include simple language drills using modelling and repeating during the day in circle time. And here's some examples of familiar activities that you can use in your classroom and send home. Okay, so in addition, the teacher also notices the section on supporting parents and decides to send home some visual flashcards so that Sadia's parents can help with Sadia's understanding of the vocabulary. We mentioned this earlier with Principle 1. So the teacher recalls this and guides the parents with some ideas on how they can do this, and of course sends home appropriate resources. Okay, so looking at effective and holistic pupil assessment. So in the guidance, the teacher notices that there's lots of strategies on how to approach assessing Sadia. So firstly, with an initial assessment at a starting point, and then strategies on how to proceed with conducting formative assessments that can be used alongside the communication and language early learning goal descriptors, and finally strategies for continuous assessment for learning. The teacher reads the guidance on the importance, has read the guidance on the importance of collecting the background information. This has been done and is reassured again that the suggestions on conducting an initial assessment include playing classroom games, which she has already planned for and is doing with her class. So that will inform that assessment. So, and finally, social inclusion. So teacher looks at the guidance and has a look, and she notices that there are suggestions in there for using within the setting and suggestions from beyond the setting. So, for example, within the setting, there is pronouncing your names correctly and ensure that all adults and pupils in the classroom do the same. And beyond the classroom, as we've seen earlier, the communication with parents or carers on expectations, how parents and carers can help their children understand new routines and their learning are very effective, and in turn could help those children participate more confidently and develop their independence within their new environment, such as providing information on local area and inclusive opportunities around finding out if parents need an interpreter, finding out if parents, carers need leaflets about the English education system. So there are many suggestions like that. And again, they don't need preparation. I think they just need knowing about. And ultimately, they are conducive to a very welcoming and inclusive environment for everyone. So in conclusion, to my little fictional early years example case study, what has Sadia gained in the first few weeks of her term, of her start at school? Well, she's made some friends. She's enjoyed listening to a new story. She's learnt some new animal names and shared animal names in Urdu with her classmates and teachers. She's made full use of her linguistic repertoire as much as able. And above all, she has been fully included in all the class activities. In addition, her teacher has a good picture of Sadia's present skills. Her parents have been supported and helped. And what we have is a happy and settled young learner in the early years setting. So, in creative, inclusive spaces, which is what I hope the new guidance will guide you in, makes a crucial difference. So I'll leave you with this final quote on the slide from Evan Schneider Arnott et al. From 2020. And I really hope that the ideas and suggestions in the document will help to create and embed inclusive spaces in early years and enable young multilingual learners learn, thrive, and above all, be happy. And I think it's time for questions. Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Karen. That was really useful, really interesting, and hopefully our practitioners will find it useful too, and hopefully you know, a helpful balance of ideas that don't require lots of extra work. We're very, very mindful of how hard our early years practitioners work. So hopefully this will be helpful. So we've only had one question so far. So if anybody has got any other questions, please do share those now. So the question was, is the assessment framework expected to be used by early years teachers to assess language proficiency? Or is it just to be used as a reference guide to help understand how language might develop?
I would say the first part of the question, I think it is for teachers to use to assess the proficiency of their young learners, either initially or formatively, and obviously continuously, and hopefully to use it, as I said, alongside the communication, language and communication early learning goals, so that there's a correlation. So where they are in their proficiency will help you to understand their progression towards, particularly for that early learning goal, because that has to be done and you know, recorded about what they know in English, so that it's moving, you know, it's a moving target, isn't it? So it should inform, but I would say so. I think it's about proficiency in English. Does that answer the question?
Okay, I think so. So it's about actually assessing it.
But using it in that unintrusive way that I hope I've tried to explain through the observation. Children tell us a lot of things.
And there's a section on that in the guidance.
Yes,
Okay, so we don't have any other questions at the moment. Let me just absolutely double check. No, there's no more questions. Cam, would you be able to move on a slide, please? So normally at this point, we tell you about the courses that we've got coming up. Now we have got the Leading Whole School Strategy is the next course that we've got coming up, and that's in January. However, we've got, is that on a timer? I think it's just whizzed itself right ahead.
It's doing its own thing, Caroline.
We've got quite an exciting development that we're really pleased about. Could you go back a bit more, Karen? Sorry.
Of course I can. Sorry.
One of them. So on our website, under training, there's a section called regional training. There's a QR code there and the shortened link as well. And we have licensed partners who are trained and licensed to run our courses in their own areas. So in their schools, in their MATs, in their areas. And so some of those partners are also offering open access courses, as well as doing closed group courses. So All of the partners are listed, so the map is divided into regions, and for each region you can click on it and see who the partners are. And then some of those partners are also listing open access courses that you can book on. So instead of it just being limited to the courses that we're running, we're also now advertising courses that are available a bit closer to you, hopefully. Some of them are online and are more broadly available, so you don't have to be in that region necessarily. But they've all got how you can book onto those, because they're all with different providers, but they are all trained and licensed to work with our materials. So yeah, we're really excited about this, and hopefully it will mean that more people are able to access training in their own areas, either for themselves or for more people in their schools. So that's that. And then, so thanks, Karen, if you can move forward. So that's, for example, they're the partners who are in the West Midlands. So Golden Thread Teaching School Hub, Warwickshire County Council, Coventry Council. Oh, it's moved up forward again. No, not to worry.
No, I'm not actually touching anything. It's kind of doing its own thing now. It's been busy today.
And Birmingham City Council. So they're all providing training, and then some examples of courses that were available as well. You could see those there. So Karen also talked a little bit about great ideas, and these are some that are particularly useful in the for early years practitioners. So scaffolding, visuals, drama and role play, and flashcards. If you're not already familiar with the great ideas area on the website, it's a really useful area, probably the most visited area on the website. Very practical. There's information about what the strategies are, how they can be adapted for different proficiency bands, and then there's a short video to go with each of them as well. And then all of our teaching resources, which you can find in the resource library, make use of these great ideas. So you know, by all means, go and have a look as well and see what's in the resource library as well that might be of use and save a bit of time. Okay, so just a reminder then that the recording to the webinar and the links will be sent out to you in an email tomorrow. And thank you very much for joining us. I hope it was useful.
Thank you, everybody.